The Ark of the Covenant, the Arona Bris, it is the most sacred, the most iconic of the vessels of the Tabernacle and the Temple, and truthfully, the most iconic and holy of all physical things. This golden ark was constructed by the Israelites during their years in the wilderness, less than a year after the Exodus. They built it. It's built by Bezalel under the stewardship of Moshe, and it was a very dramatic looking thing. It was a series of nested boxes. You have a gold box in which a wooden box was placed, in which a second golden box was placed. So 3 nested boxes like a Russian doll. And the ark was wreathed with a golden crown. And it was covered with an iconic gold cover upon which golden cherubs were hewn from a single block of gold. This is called the Ark of the Covenant because the tablets of the covenant, the tablets of testimony, were placed inside of it. The tablets upon which God etched the 10 Commandments and gave to Moshe, that was inside the box, but of course you wouldn't see it because it's in the innermost box and it's covered with that cherub-capped cover, but they were there. This ark was a fixture inside the most sacred, sacrosanct, inner sanctums of the tabernacle and of the temple. It was placed in the Holy of Holies, in the most holy inner sanctum. That place was visited only once a year, on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, by only one person, the holiest person, the high priest. Our nation had the ark for many, many centuries, and it had a long and fascinating history. It was in the tabernacle in the wilderness prior to the nation entering the land of Israel, the Holy Land. It was installed in the tabernacle at Shiloh after the conquest and the settlement of the land. And when Solomon built the permanent temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, that was built 480 years after the Exodus. We still had the ark, and it was installed in Solomon's temple. At some point, the ark was hidden, was put away. Once the second temple was built, the ark was gone. And for 2,500 years now, its whereabouts are mostly unknown. It's still around, we know that for sure. It's hidden away in some secret place. The ark is still extant in all of its golden splendor, and it still has the tablets inside of it, and it's still capped with those iconic cherubs. But we don't know where it is, and when the third temple will be rebuilt with the arrival of Messiah, our tradition tells us that the ark, in all of its splendor, will be rediscovered and reinstalled in Temple 3.0 to be built in the same location as the previous 2 temples on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and we hope to witness that day. So this is the story of the Ark of the Covenant, its history, the decisions made to hide it, and what we know about its current whereabouts. This Ark has a long and fascinating history. A history that goes back, way, way back to the very founding of our people more than 3,000 years ago. 50 days after the Exodus from Egypt, the nation coalesced around Mount Sinai for the most significant event in all of human history. This is a nation that just previously were slaves in Egypt, a nation of millions of people that were extracted from Egypt with great pomp and ceremony, with 10 plagues. The Almighty extricated them, a nation from amidst another nation, with an outstretched arm and wonders and miracles. And now, only 50 days later, they were temporarily transformed into prophets. God appeared upon the mountain, and he communicated the 10 commandments to the whole nation. According to our tradition, present at the time, in addition to all the Israelites who had just left Egypt, were the souls of all future Jewish people, including, by the way, Jewish or future Jewish converts. So the entire nation was there, and they experienced prophecy as one, and they heard the 10 commandments from God Almighty. These 10 commandments are a digest of Torah, of God's will. It's a concentrated form of all of the will of God that we call Torah. The 10 commandments encapsulate all of Torah, and our nation, collectively as one, experienced prophecy and heard it from God directly and lived to tell the tale and lived to perpetuate this experience. So the nation has the 10 commandments, has that experience, but it's only a digest. They still need to hear the details. So you have like the abstract. The abstract of the will of God is the 10 commandments, but all of Torah, all the details, all the applications, they are all still needed. So the next day, the day following this revelation, Moshe is invited to heaven to get the details, to flesh out the myriad details of Torah. Now Moshe is the leader of the people, and he has to appoint someone in his stead. Like when the president has a surgery, someone else is in charge. So he appointed his brother Aaron and his nephew Hur to oversee the nation in his absence. And he walked to the still fire-filled mountain together with his disciple Joshua. Joshua accompanied Moshe as far as he was allowed to go, and Moshe ascended the mountain in a path carved out by God through the smoke, and he transcended to the heavenly realm. And he was gone from our world for 40 days. He was still an earthling, but he transcended to a different dimension. And he spent 40 days with no bread, with no water, with no sleep, and he's surrounded by angels, and he's debating with angels, and he's ultimately overpowering the angels. And he's being taught the Torah by God. All the details of the 10 Commandments are conveyed to him. And at the end of the 40 days, Moshe has all of the Torah, and the Almighty gives him the tablets of the covenant, the tablets of testimony, this very special thing, 2 tablets, the handiwork of God, etched, so to speak, with the lettering of God, etched, so to speak, with the finger of God. And upon these tablets are inscribed the 10 commandments. Meanwhile, the nation below was getting antsy. Moshe had told them he's going to be back in 40 days, and after 40 days, there's just no sign of Moshe. And the reason for this confusion is the question of, is day 1 counted as day 1 or day 0? Moshe had said, I'll be back in 40 days. 40 full days later. A half day doesn't count. So the people, or some of them, they counted day 1 as day 1. When really, it wasn't a full day. It's not part of the calculation. So day 40 is here. Moshe is not here. And some of them wanted to appoint a replacement for Moshe. And a whole series of events happen. And there's the construction of the golden calf. And some of the Jews even begin to worship this idol. Now you recall Moshe appointed 2 people to watch the nation. Hur, his nephew, he tries to stop this madness, but he was assassinated by the mob. And Aaron understood that he would be killed too, so he tried to delay it, but ultimately he went ahead with the masses. And at the precise moment when God finished teaching Moshe all of Torah and handed him those special tablets, the tablets of the covenant, the tablets of testimony, at that very moment, the nation below worshipped the golden calf. And Moshe is informed of these terrible events, and he's clutching the tablets, and he makes his way down the mountain. And at the foot of the mountain, he finds Joshua, who hadn't departed for 40 days. And they're hearing the sounds, the blasphemous sounds of the revelry of the golden calf that's happening in the camp. And Moshe crashes the party, and he's holding these tablets, and he shatters them at the foot of the mountain. It's a pile of shards transformed before their very eyes. And Moshe continues with a flurry of activities. He seizes the golden calf and he grinds it into powder. And he takes that powder, that golden powder, and puts it in the water. And he makes all the Jews drink. And some of the guilty participants, they died from those bitter waters. And then Moshe mobilized the Levites. Who is loyal to God? Join me. And they slayed some of the perpetrators. Yet others died in a plague, depending upon the severity of idol worship of the guilty parties that determined which one of these three deaths they were killed with. Now God was fed up with the people. I'm going to destroy them. And Moshe goes up the mountain a second time, this time not to get the Torah, not to get the tablets, but to get forgiveness. He spends a second stint of 40 days entreating, pleading, praying to God to forgive the Jewish people. And after 40 days, he comes down and God tells him, I accept your prayer. Come up a third time, a third stint of 40 days. This time come with stone tablets. I want you to make the stone tablets and I will inscribe upon them the Ten Commandments. Moshe takes the stone tablets, ascends the mountain for a third time, spends an additional 40 days, and he returns on Yom Kippur with a second set of tablets. Now, there's a difference between the first set of tablets that were destroyed and the second that were not destroyed. The first were the complete handiwork of God. The stone and the writing were both godly. The second was a partnership. Moshe hewed the stone. He brought the stones up with him, and God etched upon these stones the words of the Ten Commandments. Now, a lot changed as a result of the golden calf. So, of course, the first set of tablets were shattered, and Moshe had to go up 2 more times to gain forgiveness and to get the second tablets. But also, the very nature of the relationship between God and his people was altered. Prior to the sin of the golden calf, the Almighty and his nation were bound together, and God's presence would have been ubiquitous. The nation would not need a temple, a tabernacle, to have this one specific place in which God's presence could be felt. Wherever his name was uttered, he would come and bless the people. But after the sin of the golden calf, God's presence in this world would be limited to a single point. And thus, after Moshe comes down for the third time, bearing the second set of tablets, it was time to build a tabernacle. Now, a tabernacle is a precursor of the temple. It's a house, it's a residence, it's a domicile, so to speak, in which God would dwell. God tells Moshe, make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in it. In this sanctuary of God, God's presence would reside. And that feeling would be palpable. And it would be a special place of worship. And sacrifices and offerings and services for God were done. And they had very specific and precise parameters. How it needed to be built, with what materials and different dimensions. And this was the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary that served as a forerunner to the permanent temple. The tabernacle was designed to travel with the nation. It could be assembled and disassembled with the nation as they traveled. That was the plan, and the construction began in earnest the day after Moshe descended the third time, bearing the second set of tablets. First, there was a fast fundraising effort to compile all the materials needed for this massive project. We need the gold and the silver and the copper and all these different wools and different materials. And the people responded with generosity. It took only a couple days and all the materials were assembled. And then God told Moshe that Bezalel, the grandson of the slain Hur, he will be the general contractor to build the tabernacle and its vessels, the altar, the inner altar, the outer altar, the menorah, the table, the laver, the vestments of the high priest, and of course, the ark of the covenant. This was the first vessel that Moshe was instructed to build, the ark of the covenant, and that is where those tablets, both sets of tablets, the shards of the first one and the unbroken second one, would be stored. The ark was made out of wood and plated both on the inside and on the outside with gold. Again, as we mentioned, a gold box inside a wooden box inside a second gold box. 2.5 cubits its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits is its height. A cubit is about, let's say, 18 inches. And in the box grow the tablets, and the ark is covered with a golden cover upon which were hewn the golden cherubs. Now on the sides of the ark were golden rings, and inside those rings were placed staves, so poles. So the full ark looked like a box with the cherubs on top and 2 poles, one on either side, that went through 4 rings on the 4 corners of this box. And even though those poles were ostensibly for transport, they remained affixed in the ark, even when the ark was stationary. Removing the poles from the ark was strictly prohibited. The ark was the holiest of the vessels of the tabernacle. It was placed in the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle. The tabernacle itself was in the epicenter of the camp, and the Holy of Holies was in the epicenter of the tabernacle, and the ark was in the epicenter of the Holy of Holies. And indeed, when the temple was built in the epicenter of the world, in Jerusalem, again, the ark was in its epicenter. Now, among the vessels of the tabernacle, the ark was in a category of its own. It housed the tablets. These tablets are the only physical articles that exist in this world, but originate in heaven. The tablets came from a different dimension, and the ark that housed those tablets also had miraculous nature-defined properties. So the tablets itself, they were godly. The writing, we're told, was godly. The script was godly. It had properties that cannot be reconciled with the laws of physics. The lettering and the script of the Ten Commandments bore the entire width of the stone tablets, but somehow you were able to read, if you looked at the tablets, you could read it from both sides. That's not possible in our world, but this doesn't come from our world. In addition, the letters floated. Now, what does that mean? Suppose you have a letter O, and you want to etch that letter O into a stone, and you want the etching to go all the way through the stone. You'll end up with a little floating disc, which is the inside of the letter O. Now, in the Hebrew alphabet, there are some letters like that. So the letter Mem, when it appears at the end of a word, or the letter Samach, these letters, if they're in a stone tablet, you would have a little floating disc that, of course, would fall down, right? It would be subject to the laws of gravity. But of course, the tablets were not from this world and were not subject to the rules of this world, and those discs floated. The role of the ark primarily was to house the tablets. And that's why, just as the tablets exuded otherworldly properties, the ark, as its home, also had some otherworldly properties. So if the letters floated, the ark floated too. When the Kohanim, when the priests were carrying the ark on their shoulders, it may have appeared that they were carrying the ark, but the ark did not need any human person, any human power to carry it. It actually lifted those who lifted it. So the tablets levitated, the letters of the tablets levitated, and the ark which bore the tablets, it levitated as well. And it lifted those who lifted it. Another miracle, the ark took up no space. So it's 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. So if you put it in a room, that's, let's say, 10 cubits squared, well, then you would measure from the end of the ark to one wall and from the other end of the ark to the other wall, and you would have 10 cubits minus 2.5 cubits. It would be 7.5. But somehow, you put the ark in the middle of a 10-cubit room, and you measure from one side to the wall, it's 5 cubits. From the other side to the wall, it's also 5 cubits. The ark took up no space. The ark also exuded a brilliant light that flooded the Holy of Holies. You think about the tabernacle. It was very dark. It was covered with drapes, with curtains. And there were 2 parts of the tabernacle. There was the holy, the sanctuary, and the Holy of Holies. And the sanctuary, the holy, it was illuminated with the light of the menorah. But the Holy of Holies, there was no light. It was pitch black. The temple too. The sanctuary was indoors. So in the outer part of the sanctuary, in the holy, what's known as the holy, you have the light of the menorah. You walk in to the Holy of Holies, there's not a single source of light. There's no light. You can't walk in with a torch or a flashlight. But it was not dark because the ark itself projected a brilliant light. And that's when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, walked in there on Yom Kippur, it was completely illuminated. Now in the second temple, the ark was not present, and we'll get to that in a bit. And the services that the high priest, that the Kohen Gadol did on Yom Kippur were done on a stone, on the foundation stone, the stone today that's covered by the dome of the rock. And during the second temple, the room was pitch black and it did not have the ark, so it was not illuminated. And the high priest, when he walked in, he would have to feel and grope his way around because it was dark. The miraculous nature of the ark extended to its cover. It was covered by a golden cover upon which 2 huge cherubs were placed. These cherubs had miraculous properties as well. They would swivel. They were indicators of the righteousness of the people, and they would swivel based upon the righteousness of the nation. When the nation was righteous, then the 2 cherubs swiveled to face each other, and it appeared as if they were embracing each other with their wings. In the event that the nation deviated from the path of righteousness, the 2 cherubs swiveled away from each other, as if to signal that the people and God are not united, are not embracing each other. Now, periodically, once the temple was built and operational, they would open up all the curtains and all the doorways, and the Jews from a great distance could look into the Holy of Holies and witness the cherubs in embrace. That was a form of a stress test to determine how righteous the nation was at that time. The ark in the wilderness, it accompanied the nation when they traveled. And it was at the center of the camp, and that is where Moshe went to communicate with God. It was the point of communication between Moshe and God. This is where the tablets were, and the tablets came from heaven, it's almost as if the tablets served as a portal from this world to heaven. And for 39 years, the nation was in the wilderness, and they traveled quite frequently. Over the course of the 40 years in total in the wilderness, the nation made 42 different stops. And every time they would travel, once the tabernacle is built, they would have to disassemble the tabernacle, package it all up, all the vessels, and march to the next location following the clouds. The ark needed to be covered with multiple layers when it was moved. So we mentioned earlier that there were curtains that separated the different sections of the tabernacle. It separated the sanctuary from the Holy of Holies. Those curtains were draped over the ark. But 2 more layers of packaging were added to the ark. It was covered with a waterproof tachash skin cover, and that was covered by a cover made of wool dyed blue with tichelas. When the ark was in transport, it was carried by the Levites, specifically the family of Kehat. Kehat is one of the 3 sons of Levi. And it was carried in a bit of an unusual fashion. The way we would think about it is that, they put it on their shoulders and they walk straight. But they could not turn even their side towards the ark. They would have to face the ark. And they would move sideways, edging sideways, never, of course, turning their back to the ark, actually facing it, facing each other. The 2 groups of Levites on either side would face each other, and that's how they would move, which in itself was quite an ordeal. Now, ideally, the ark is supposed to be transported by the priests, by the Kohanim, but in the wilderness, there were only 3 such people, Aaron and his 2 sons. He originally had 4 sons, but on the day of the inauguration of the tabernacle, which is about a year after the Exodus, the 2 elder sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, they walked into the tabernacle and brought an unauthorized sacrifice, and they died. So the world population of priests, of Kohanim, was exactly 3, and thus for the 40 years, or the 39 years really, that the tabernacle was in the wilderness, it was transported by the family of Kehat, by the Levites. Once the nation entered the land after 40 years in the wilderness, the ark was carried by the Kohanim, by the priests, as was appropriate. Now, it was very, very important to not touch the ark. Anyone who touched the ark would die instantly. The poles were designed for transport. They were designed to be held. But the ark itself, it had to be wrapped and covered hermetically, because you would touch it, you would die instantly. Also important to not see the ark in transport. If they would see it, they would die instantly. The movie got that right. A fire would flare out and kill whoever saw it. So it's imperative to cover it very well. And actually, when Moshe appointed the Kehatites, the family of Kehat, with the task of transporting the ark, they didn't want to do it. They objected. We don't want to die like the 2 sons of Aaron died. And therefore Moshe says, okay, by the time it arrives to you to transport it, it will already be completely covered by the Kohanim. So the small cohort of Kohanim, they would break down the ark and they would cover it with those 3 layers, the curtains, and then the waterproof tachash skin cover, and then the 3rd cover made of wool, of blue dyed wool. And only then would the Levites transport it. Now, the ark was different in how it was transported. There were 6 wagons and 12 oxen that were donated to the tabernacle for the purposes of carrying the tabernacle when it's disassembled from place to place. And that was okay for every other part of the tabernacle with the exception of the ark. It must always be carried manually on the shoulders, never in a wagon, never by the oxen, by animals. And as we shall see, this was once violated and the consequences were disastrous. Once they moved and they traveled and it was time to reassemble the tabernacle, the ark, of course, was always at its epicenter. Now, the ark was kept with other artifacts as well that were placed either inside the ark or alongside it. So you have, in addition to the tablets, there was a Torah scroll written by Moshe in the last day of his life. And that was placed either inside or right outside the ark. There's a dispute. In addition, there was a vial of manna that was preserved for posterity. There was a vial of the anointing oil that would be used to anoint the high priests and kings and the temple and the tabernacle and all its components when it was inaugurated. And the staff of Aaron that blossomed with flowers and almonds and proved the special standing of Aaron, that too was kept around the ark. Now, there's maybe a less well-known fact about the ark. If you think about it, when the tabernacle was built, it was built after Moshe went up 3 times to get the first tablets, to get the second tablet, to get forgiveness. It was built after Moshe descended a 3rd time. It was inaugurated almost a year after the Exodus. Where were the tablets housed before the tabernacle and the ark were completed? So it's a little bit less well known that there was actually a second ark. There's one ark made of gold built by Bezalel, and there was a second wooden ark, and that is where the tablets were placed until the golden ark was ready. And thus, over the course of the time in the wilderness, and even once the nation entered the land, they actually had 2 arks. One was kept in the tabernacle, in the camp, the golden one. And the second ark was used for other reasons. So it would scout out, it was still magical. It would scout out ahead of the nation. And it was also used for war. When the nation went out to war, they brought the ark. Which ark? The second wooden ark with them. And that would ensure invincibility. And before a war, they would enter the Holy of Holies and remove the shards of the first tablets and place it in the second wooden ark. And that is what they would bring with them to battle. And there was once, many, many centuries later, where they actually brought the original golden ark to battle, and that was a disaster, as we shall see. Now, the Torah ends before the entrance to the land of Canaan, to the land of Israel. The nation was encamped right on the border, right on the river Jordan, on its east bank opposite the city of Jericho. Joshua was appointed as Moshe's successor, and we read what happened next in the book of Joshua. The ark played a critical role in the crossing of the Jordan. The people were commanded to follow the ark from a distance, 2,000 cubits away, and it was carried by the priests, and they approached the Jordan River, and they put their feet into its waters. And the instant their feet touched the waters of the Jordan River, the river split. And the upper waters began to pile vertically instead of under the normal course of the river. And the lower waters continued to flow downstream. So this very large, dry land for the nation to cross. So the priests are carrying the ark, and they're in the riverbed where the river Jordan used to flow. And they're carrying the ark. And as long as the ark was held in the riverbed, the waters remained split, and the nation crossed over. After the entire nation crossed the Jordan from east to west, the Kohanim, they went backwards. They headed back to the east bank. And the rivers once again crashed down. So you had the entire nation on one side of the Jordan, on the west bank, and the ark, which was carried by the Kohanim, on the east bank. And then, just to add some flair, the ark lifted those who carried it and levitated in the air, gliding over the now normally flowing river Jordan, and landed gracefully on the west side of the Jordan. The nation entered the land in style. Now, the ark played a central role in all sorts of ceremonies and events. On the day of the crossing, the nation made the trek to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. This is a distance of about 40 miles, so that was a miracle. And they got there, and Joshua wrote the whole Torah and plastered it with plaster, and they offered sacrifices on an altar that was erected, and they had a feast, and they rejoiced. And then the nation was divided into 3 groups. On one mountain, on Mount Gerizim, a green and luscious mountain, the tribes of Shimon and Levi and Yehuda and Judah and Yisachar, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin were encamped. And on the other mountain, Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. On Mount Ebal, a rocky and barren mountain, that is where they encamped. And in the middle, the Levites, the Kohanim, and the ark. And the Levites turned to one mountain and gave a blessing, and turned to the other mountain and gave a curse. And they continued that for 11 blessings and curses. Blessed is the man who does not make a sculptured or molten image, abhorred by God, a craftsman's handiwork, and sets it up in secret. And everyone responded, Amen. And they did the opposite proclamation when they faced the opposite mountain. Cursed is the man who makes a sculptured or molten image, and so on. And everyone responded, Amen. They continued that for 11 blessings and curses, culminating in the final one that included the entire Torah. Blessed is he who upholds the Torah. Cursed is he who does not uphold the Torah. And everyone responded with Amen, with Amen. The nation traveled back to Jericho. That would be the first conflict, the first war, the first battle of what would end up being 7 years of war of conquest. Jericho was surrounded by a thick, impregnable wall, and its entrances were completely sealed. No one entered, no one departed. But that doesn't matter. God tells the nation, tells Joshua, surround the city, encircle it once a day for 7 days. 7 priests traveling ahead of the ark, blowing with 7 shofars. And then on day 7, they do it 7 times. The final blow of the shofar, the walls collapse into the ground. Now, it took them 14 years to settle the land, to conquer much of the land, not all of the land, and to distribute the land to the tribes. During that time, the ark and the tabernacle were in a place called Gilgal. After 14 years of conquest and dividing up the land, a sanctuary was established in the city of Shiloh, in Shiloh, near Shechem, in the tribal lands of Ephraim, son of Joseph. This was almost a temple. It had the ark, it had the altar, and when it was active, it was prohibited to offer sacrifices elsewhere. But even then, the people knew that it was not a permanent sanctuary. It was not the actual place where God has chosen. It was temporary. And therefore, even though they were there for almost 370 years, 369 years, that's some time. Nevertheless, they never built a permanent edifice in Shiloh. They simply took the tabernacle and installed it there. Now, over time, the wooden beams of the tabernacle became consumed with age. So they did erect a stone building, but they kept the roof made out of the curtains of the tabernacle to symbolize that this is not the final resting spot. There was an understanding that they would build a permanent temple in some other place. This was the site of the thrice yearly pilgrimages. So, for example, the memorable visits of Elkanah, father of Samuel, that was to the sanctuary in Shiloh. And for the duration of the period of Judges, the tabernacle and the ark were in Shiloh. The penultimate judge was a man named Eli. And over the course of these many centuries and decades, there was still sporadic fighting between the Jews and some of the Canaanite nations. And in chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Samuel, we read how the Jews sought an ill-advised military encounter with the Philistines, and they made a mistake. They brought the ark with them. They thought that would enhance their efforts. It would bring merit to their war. Now, taking the ark to war was commonly done, but recall there were two arks, the ark of wood and the ark of gold, and typically they would place the shards of the tablets. They would remove it from the golden ark and place it in the wooden ark. But in this war, they made the ill-advised decision to bring the golden ark to war against the Philistines. And the verse tells us, the people came to the camp, and the elders of Israel said, why did Hashem smite us today before the Philistines? They were losing the battle, and they said, we're going to bring the ark. Let us take with us from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of Hashem, that he may come in our midst and save us from the hands of our enemies. So the people went to Shiloh and carried from there the ark of the covenant of Hashem, master of legions, who dwells atop the cherubs, together with the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas. They brought the ark. And that was a terrible disgrace, because it was inappropriate to take the ark outside of the sanctuary. And not only did it not help in the war effort, the Philistines won the battle. They fought with tenacity. They won, and they kidnapped the ark. This is a terrible devastation. The ark and the tablets are now in our enemies' hands. The two sons of Eli died in the war. Eli was an old 98-year-old judge. He was still in Shiloh. And a Benjaminite ran to tell him the news. Who was this Benjaminite? It was none other than the future king of the nation, Saul. He gives him the bad news. He hears it, and he dies on the spot. Now the Philistines, they proceeded to destroy the tabernacle in Shiloh. And they now have possession of the ark, but it was very much to their detriment. All sorts of terrible things happened to them now that they were bearers of the ark. They triumphantly placed it next to their idol, but the next day they found the idol decapitated and missing its hands. And then all of the Philistines were struck with severe illness. They had hemorrhoids, and think about how uncomfortable this is. Mice that infiltrated them rectally and caused havoc to their intestines, and many of them, in fact, died. And they understood that this is because they are bearing the ark of God. So they wanted to pass it off to another tribe, and the other tribe gets the ark, and they too start to suffer with severe illness and rampant death. So after several months, all the different Philistine tribes get together, a convention, what to do about the ark. And they decided to return it to the Jews. Not just that, to offer sacrifices to atone for their sins. They took 2 nursing cows, who would otherwise not abandon their calves, and they harnessed them to a wagon, and they placed upon the wagon the ark and also a series of offerings. They sent the wagon off, and indeed the cows went on the road without any guide on the road to Beit Shemesh, and they arrived in that Jewish city. And the Jews were busy working on the fields, and what do you know? They see at a distance a wagon being carried by 2 cows. And on top of the wagon, there's the ark. It's unmistakable. and the cows saunter into their town. And not only do we have the Ark of the Covenant, they have golden gifts that were given by the Philistines. The Ark is back in Jewish hands. But what to do with the Ark? So the verse tells us in chapter 6 of the book of Samuel, the Levites had unloaded the Ark of God and the box that was with it, in which there were the golden gifts from the Philistines, and they placed it all on a large rock. And the people of Beit Shemesh, of this city, they offered up elevation offerings and slaughtered feast offerings on that day to God. Meanwhile, the Philistines that have been watching from a distance, they saw it. Jews have it. It's not a problem anymore. And they left. And this, of course, is a great triumph and joyous occasion. But there was, again, insufficient reverence accorded to the Ark. And on that day, the verse tells us that the Jews looked at the Ark and a severe plague befell them. And that resulted in the death of 50,070 Jews. Now, what exactly they did wrong, it's not agreed upon. Some suggest that even though the Ark came and they were working in the fields, they just kept on working in the fields. They prostrated themselves to the Ark, but then they got back to business as usual. Others suggest maybe they looked at the tablets, they pulled them out, and so on. It's possible that they didn't rush to cover it. As we know, you're supposed to cover the Ark. Regardless, they disrespected the Ark in some fashion and were punished. Meanwhile, Shiloh is destroyed. So the tabernacle is no longer in Shiloh. It was reinstalled in a city called Nov, and then in a city called Givon, and it was there for 57 years until the building of the temple in Jerusalem. But the Ark was not in the tabernacle for those 57 years. It had been taken away from Shiloh, brought to war, kidnapped by the Philistines. They kept it for a few months. They returned it. It's now in Beit Shemesh. But because there was a massive plague, the residents of this city, they realized that they were unworthy of hosting the Ark, and they appealed to the residents of a different city, a city called Kiryat Ye'arim, to take the Ark, which they did. So the Ark remained in Kiryat Ye'arim for 20 years. By that time, David was the king of Israel, and he had established his capital in Jerusalem, and he wanted to legitimize Jerusalem as the center of the nation by transporting the Ark from Kiryat Ye'arim to Jerusalem. And he did it. And there were tens of thousands of people who gathered to witness and to partake in this transport. And it was quite a dramatic affair, dancing and singing and all sorts of musical instruments. But again, amid the joy, tragedy struck. In transporting the Ark from Kiryat Ye'arim to Jerusalem, David made two critical blunders. Firstly, he used a wagon. He had thought that the restriction against using an animal or a wagon, that was limited to the times in the wilderness. But now it will be okay to put it on a wagon. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two, he did not limit those who transported the Ark to the priests, to the Kohanim, and to the Levites. And as a result, there was a tragedy. Along the way, the Ark seemed to stumble, and it seemed to topple over. And of course, if the Ark falls on the ground, that's a disaster. So a man named Uzzah rushed over to go stop it from falling, and he touched the Ark with his bare hands, and that, of course, resulted in his instant death. So in the middle of this transportation, we have a tragedy. David diverts the Ark for 3 months to the home of someone named Oved Adam. And after 3 months, David renewed the procession again with great fanfare, and this time the ark arrived safely in Jerusalem. Now at the time, Jerusalem was the capital, but the temple was not yet built, and the ark would remain in Jerusalem for 37 more years in a temporary tent until Solomon, son of David, built the first temple there. Now, David had wanted to build the temple himself, but the prophet told him that he is not eligible. It will be built by his son, Solomon. And indeed, Solomon built the temple and installed the ark in its Holy of Holies. And again, Solomon demonstrated that the ark was different than the rest of the vessels. All the other vessels, the table, the altars, the menorah, Solomon made a new version of those vessels. But the ark, of course, he kept the original. Now, the first temple stood for more than 400 years until it was destroyed by the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. After 70 years of exile, the second temple was built, and the second temple had all the vessels and accoutrements of the first temple, with the exception of the ark. The ark was missing. It was the only fixture of the temple that was absent in the second go-round. Now, day-to-day operations, maybe it doesn't really matter because no one goes into the Holy of Holies with the exception of the high priest on Yom Kippur. What did the high priest do in the second temple era? So we learned that there was a stone there. And the stone was 3 finger lengths above the ground. And this is the Even Shesiyah, the foundation stone, the first stone that God placed on terra firma. The ark was missing, and the services were done on that stone. Now, the rules state that if you, let's say, lose or something happens to one of the vessels of the temple, you could build another one. So how come they didn't build a second ark? We know the dimensions. We know what it's made out of. Build it. The answer, of course, is that the essence of the ark are the tablets encased within it. So absent tablets, there's no point of making, there's no ark. It's not an ark of testimony if there is no tablets of testimony inside of it. And the question that everyone wants to know is, where did the original ark go? Where was it placed? Where can we find it now? At some point, it disappeared. Where to? There are 3 different opinions with regards to this question. The first opinion states, actually, the ark never went anywhere. It is still exactly where it always was, in its place in the Holy of Holies. This opinion argues that the ark is there, but because it's from this different dimension, it's totally invisible to us. Recall that the ark does not take up any space from one side of the ark to the other, 5 cubits. From the other side of the ark to the wall, it is also 5 cubits. So this opinion says, well, it's there, just we're not worthy of seeing it. You recall, of course, the episode of the binding of Isaac. Abraham traveled with Isaac to Mount Moriah. And they took 2 lads with them. Who are the 2 lads? They are Ishmael and Eliezer. And the Midrash tells us that when they arrived and they saw the mountain from a distance, Abraham turned to Isaac and to Ishmael and to Eliezer and said, do you see what I see? Do you see that cloud hovering over the top of that mountain? Abraham saw it. Isaac saw it. But Ishmael and Eliezer did not see it. They did not have the ability to interface with the spiritual like Abraham and Isaac did. So the first opinion argues, it's right there. But it's so transcendentally holy that unless you have the proper lenses, you won't see it. It's just invisible to us. The second opinion tells us that it's not there. It was hidden. when the writing was on the wall that the temple would be destroyed. In the times of the prophet Jeremiah, Chilkiyahu, the high priest, he showed the king the prophecy of exile. The verse in Devarim, Deuteronomy, tells us that there's a king who will be deposed and you'll be sent into exile. And they were worried what's going to be if the temple's overtaken by our enemies and they have all these precious vessels there. They made a decision to hide it, to hide the ark and to hide all the vessels of the tabernacle, the temple now, and all the other artifacts that were in the environs of the ark. So the vial of manna that we mentioned, the staff of Aaron that had blossomed and sprouted almonds, the anointing oil, some of the afer para, some of the ashes of the red heifer, they hid it. Where did they hide it? When Solomon built the temple, he foresaw that eventually the temple would be destroyed. So when he built it, he built the complex, he built all sorts of secret passageways and secret underground chambers and hiding spots so that the people who will be around on the doorstep of destruction could hide the things they don't want our enemies to get their hands on. And specifically in the basements, in the underground chambers of the temple, that's where they kept the wood for the altar. They would harvest all the wood in the summer and they would keep it in a special designated location downstairs from the temple. And the Kohanim who were disqualified from doing any service in the temple because they were blemished, they would manage this chamber of wood. And according to our tradition, through that chamber, there was a secret entranceway, a secret alleyway, a secret passageway, where the king Josiah, together with the prophets, hid some of the artifacts and vessels of the temple. And when the second temple was built, you could just make a new menorah, make a new altar, make a new table. But unless you find the original, you cannot make a new ark. And there was a story that's documented of a priest, of a blemished priest in the Second Temple era, who noticed one of the tiles of the floor was a bit out of place. And he's like, well, what's that? It looks like it's some sort of secret passageway. So he ran to tell his friends. And he started telling them, I saw something and maybe this is where they hid the ark. And let me show you. Boom. He dies on the spot. And everyone knew, the story continues, that that's where the ark was hidden. The third opinion tells us that the ark was taken to Babylon when the entire nation, or the majority of the nation, went into exile. They smuggled the ark with them. It's not so clear which ark is being discussed. That may have been that second ark with the shards of the broken tablets. Some suggest that maybe the ark was taken there, but was brought back and hidden in that secret hiding spot. But of course, no one knows for sure. Now, to find the ark that has fascinated treasure hunters for millennia, Indiana Jones is not the only one hunting the temple's lost artifacts. And some of them really tried to find it, and they understood that it's probably in that location on Temple Mount. I get a sense that if you were to walk Temple Mount, of course, Jews are not allowed to walk on Temple Mount unless we are ritually pure, which we're not. But let's say you go to the Kotel, the Western Wall. That's the last retaining wall of the Temple Mount complex. If you just stand there, my sense is you're within 500 feet in some direction, or maybe 1,000 feet of the ark. But unless the Almighty wants us to find it, we just will not find it. You recall perhaps in the Second Temple era, when there was no ark, so the high priest would do the services on a stone, on a foundation stone. Almost everyone agrees that that stone is the stone that's now capped by a shrine called the Dome of the Rock on top of Temple Mount. Now, there's a discrepancy in the size of the stone. In the Second Temple era, it's about 2,000 years ago, we know that it was 3 fingers off the ground. What's that, a couple of inches, 3-4 inches? Today, this stone, this rock, is like 20 feet tall. What happened in the interim? So we know that the Roman Emperor Hadrian, he raised with a Z, Temple Mount. But there's another suggestion. Everyone wants to know where the ark is. Everyone is fascinated by that. And some enterprising treasure hunter said, I'm going to go and bring my pickaxe and shovel. And he began to excavate the bedrock of Temple Mount and exposing more and more of that stone until now it's 20 feet in the air. Of course, he did not find it. Our sources tell us that when Messiah comes, the ark will be found again. The ark and all of its associated items. And I always wonder what would happen if we found it. Would you die if you looked at it? We know that the people of Beit Shemesh, they died, 50,000 of them, because they gazed at it. They didn't cover it fast enough. But it makes you wonder, is this maybe a plausible scenario of Messiah? Messiah is this idea that the whole world changes their perception. So some think, well, maybe one of these Houthi missiles will land on Temple Mount and explode the area and clear it up, and the whole course of human history is going to change. Or maybe you'll have a rogue operator of one of the interceptor missiles, the Iron Dome or David's Sling. When there's a projectile, so the system is able to calculate the speed and the trajectory and the angle of this missile or projectile, and they could triangulate where I would shoot my missile to explode. Let's say shooting a bullet with a bullet. And they could determine if it's going to fall like an empty field. Why waste an interceptor missile? But imagine if someone says, I'm going to go rogue. I'm going to calculate where I would intercept the missile so it lands on a spot that I want to vacate. I want to excavate. What if that happens? That's not so implausible. But if we find the ark and it's exuding this brilliant light and anyone who comes near it dies on the spot, that may change the attitude of a lot of people in the world. Who knows? But we are told this ark is still extant. It's still around. The one built by Bezalel under the stewardship of Moshe. It's still around. It will be rediscovered and enshrined in the third temple. May we all be so fortunate to witness that day. This is the story of the Ark of the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant, the Arona Bris, its history, and what we know about its current whereabouts. My name is Yaakov Wolbe. I'm coming to you from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this. I look forward, please God, to maybe do some more history podcasts upcoming. I know it's been a bit neglected, these sorts of subjects. I've been working on some of the other stuff. Thank God it's a full docket. But let me know what you think. Send me your questions, your comments, your feedback. rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.